the Primitive Patterns Podcast. It's time to live your mystery.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Primitive Patterns Podcast. Today we're joined by Malin. She's an amazing researcher into freediving, just an overall really cool human being that we've been stoked to talk to. So I'll throw it over your way. Just give our audience kind of what you're all about in life, what you're currently researching, what you've researched in the past, and we'll go from there.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So my name is Malin. I'm a researcher. I'm also a freediver. I'm adventurous and really love exploring uncharted territories. I love the idea of experiencing as much as possible during my life and help others live an amazing life and have a very interesting one as well. And yeah, I've been doing research in the realm of psychedelics for, almost 10 years now. Psychedelics, breathwork, freediving, and in terms of like expertise, I've primarily focused my research on the effects and mechanisms of 5-MeO or DMT. And recently wrapped up a very exciting project comparing two different administration routes, intramuscular injection and vaporization. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be off to Croatia to collect some data on freediving, actually, on the effects on the mind as well as the body. So super stoked about that.
Amazing. Yeah, there's a million and one things I want to ask you, but I'll start off just with the research with 5-MeO, like, with all the trials that you've done and all the people that you've worked with, what are some things that a typical person will experience during a 5-MeO dosing? And what are you noticing in the research? Just common things that you're pulling through all of the people that you've worked with.
Yeah, so I've done naturalistic work. So going into the field whereby people are entering these like one-on-one sessions with the facilitator. And in those sessions, like apart from the container with the facilitator, it's very common for people to report on this experience of unity that comes on with the effects of the psychedelic substance, and that they're all one with everything. There's a big experience of love and God, and people experience that differently. It can come on very quickly, the effects, depending on the route of administration, like vaporization, which is mostly used, let's say, in the field, has a very quick onset and offset. And this is in contrast to intramuscular injection, whereby people get it injected into the muscle, and the onset is very gradual. So like 3 to 4, 6 minutes, and then you have a longer window of the experience. Cool. And also like a longer offset. So what we saw in the recent study is that the IM route gives people more time to process and to engage in like therapeutic process, if that's what they're aiming for. When it comes to research results, it's shown already by other people that 5-MeO DMT can elicit mystical experiences of greater, let's say, magnitude than, for example, psilocybin. Mm-hmm. And also we see the same in my research, and that the, let's say, experience of ego dissolution that is evoked is correlated with, let's say, reductions in affect or increases in satisfaction with life and mindfulness and things like this.
And I know this is a pretty loaded question, but when you see the effects and what this is able to do through the administration of a substance like that, how do you believe that people are actually able to, afterwards have long-term personality changes and be able to deal with things in the past in a clearer way and move forward in life just kind of with this new lens? Like, what are some of the scientific proposed mechanisms there? And then what are maybe just some thoughts you have outside of the science on why they're able to have these experiences and be a little more fluid afterwards?
Well, I think that one of the critical models to consider is the pivotal mental states model by Robin Codd Harris. And it's about how psychological transformation occurs. So, psychedelic stimulates the 2A receptor, and it can also create like neuroplasticity, things like this. And so, when there is a psychological change, people's behavior might also change. But I also believe that there's a physiological arm parallel to this pivotal mental state, which I'm soon going to be publishing in a paper. So it's about pivotal physical states. So this would involve then the autonomic nervous system, the immune system, the stress response, and everything. And through my research, we've also seen that 5-MeO-DMT, though it activates the stress response, also lower inflammation markers in the body. So I think there is probably a dual mechanism going on here that could create a window for change in one out of two directions. Because the way I see it, like when you exercise or when I free dive or anything like this, the system is being stressed. So psychedelics are stressors. And depending on the system's ability to deal with it is going to make or break it, you know? So it all comes down to the resilience of the person, whether they're able to use this psychedelic as a stressor for healing, or if it leads to more dysfunction, re-traumatization.
Yeah, the one
So
thing.
that's one thing.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay. I was just going to say also integration matters, like how people then walk the talk of insights or things they realized during the actual experience and how they integrate it later on into their life.
Yeah. Speaking of integration, I guess this comes beforehand, but and afterwards as well. But one thing I found really interesting and a huge reason I wanted to talk to you was the paper that you just published on body set, because I had never heard anyone term body set, and just looking at, okay, well, before you have this experience, really trying to get the physiological parameters at a good baseline prior to a psychedelic. So within that body set framework, like what are things you're realizing within the research that are very important for people to focus on from a physiology perspective prior to, say, doing 5-MeO or psilocybin or any modality that they choose?
Before somebody does ayahuasca, there's a range of preparatory rituals that people normally engage in, whether it's reducing intake of meat, any other stressor like TV, trying to engage more in mindfulness, being more in nature. They're eating differently, right? So that will have an impact on their body set, you know? And so when someone, let's say, would enter a 5-MeO DMT experience and preparation is not catered for, the system might be already under a lot of stress, right? From various things in the environment, social dynamics, whatever. And then you add 5-MeO DMT on top of that, it would be tricky, I think.
So could we just provide a little bit of clarity too, just in case like some listeners have heard the term or haven't heard the term body set before? I think everybody is pretty clear on what mindset is, right? If you need a certain mindset going into a big sporting event or whatever the case may be, I'm sure people have thought of that in their life. But what do you guys mean, or specifically you, sorry, what do you mean when you say body set?
Yeah. So we have the classical set and setting framework in psychedelics. So setting would be the environment in which you do the experience, and mindset is the headspace you go into it with. Body set is basically the state of the body that you enter a psychedelic experience, or it could even be freediving, right? And depending on, let's say, stress in your body, like elevated inflammation markers, it will have an impact on the way that you experience the substance. because at the end of the day, the experience will be the sum of all those things: set, setting, and body set.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, just figured it'd be a good idea to get some clarity on that. And then one other question that I had for you is, you had mentioned it a few minutes ago, with you need to be or be able to have a certain amount of resilience leading into the stressor of whatever ceremony or psychedelic experience you're leading into. I think sometimes there's a misconception that these tools or modalities may be good for everybody. And if you're going through something, then it might be like a one size fits all approach. Anybody can do it and benefit from it. In your experience, what are some signs of a person that would lead you to believe that going into a psychedelic experience might not be the best thing for them at that time?
Oh, well, it could be so many things. I mean, openness to face something is one of the things I find very crucial, and also something I ask for myself whenever I do challenges. Like, am I going to be able to stick with this and what it demands of me, or am I going to run away from it, like, or put up defense mechanisms or block it? So that's one thing. What else?
I guess my main question was like, if somebody has been diagnosed with, whether it's anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, like something like that, if they've been diagnosed with something and they feel like nothing has worked for them in the past, is there a certain diagnosis, or like heart disease? Is there a certain diagnosis that, as the practitioner leading into a ceremony like 5-MeO-DMT, you would look at as a red flag from that
yeah,
sense?
like that, like very difficult, like heart problems, heavy schizophrenia. I would be cautious with that for sure.
Okay.
Cool. And when it comes to like the free diving, where do you see, like, I know that's a big part of your life. And I guess my question here is, where has free diving, like what evolution have you got from that practice of free diving, and how is there parallels to the research with psychedelics within free diving?
Oh, yeah. So I started freediving about 4 years ago now, and it was around COVID times. And it was to overcome my fear of the sea and confront that. And it definitely helped me get over that fear. I got into a beautiful community. I found a home in Egypt, in Dahab. And through training, I had my own mystical experiences at depth, and I had a lot of conversations with fellow freedivers reporting similar things. And I remember this one dive in particular in the very beginning of my training, when I was doing level 1 or level 2 freediving, and I was just going to 16 meters. And for a microsecond, I had, let's say, a whiteout, which is very common to experience with 5-MeO-DMT.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, whoa. I was very surprised by it. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And I was like, oh, I'm at 15 meters. I cannot have a 5-MeO experience now. So I kind of blocked it in a way. But I remember coming up and did my recovery breathing, and I spoke to my instructor. I was like, I think I just had a psychedelic experience. And so that was one thing, that it can elicit mystical experiences to a similar magnitude as psychedelics. And there's even a paper that reported this. I can send it to you later.
Yeah, please do.
And also just like the alchemy of freediving. Like, I just went through a period of training with my instructor Sol, and we had a beautiful little, let's say, period of time, and we kind of used the water as a metaphor for the unconscious. So you take a deep breath in, you go down, And whatever happens during the dive is sort of like a little micro psychedelic experience. For me, overcoming the fear of the ocean and a shark incident that happened some years ago, it's been very powerful because there's a lot of psychedelic things going on for me when I dive, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So similarly, psychedelics could function in a similar way, like you going into yourself to excavate something, work something out. So that's a little bit of the comparison. Also, I'm sure that there is something to be said for it being a stressor. Like
Mhm.
holding your breath is very stressful for the system. So I'm sure there's probably similarities in terms of what I spoke about earlier with like pivotal mental states, pivotal physical states, just through different mechanisms. And so I'm curious to see what we find in the research that we're going to do coming up in a few weeks.
Very cool. Have you ever had a thought of putting together some form of like retreat or group where you blend both, where, you know, like an introduction to diving and the breath work, and then maybe at some point there's a psychedelic experience, and then you get back into the water maybe days later as like just a form of blending both in the same, call it maybe like 2 week period?
Like a retreat, me
Yeah,
hosting a
something of that
retreat.
nature.
I mean, hosting retreats have been on my radar, but using psychedelics and that doesn't feel quite aligned with the legality aspect of it.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, but I mean, breathwork and freediving can, I think, evoke similar states just through different means.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention is you hear people a lot of times, like whether they a typical one is holotropic breath work, you hear of people having some pretty profound experiences with that. And I can only imagine that essentially if you have to connect pretty deeply to your breath, I'm sure, to be able to have the calmness and the awareness to free dive to a certain depth underwater and to just be able to get yourself into that state. You're essentially connecting with the deepest, most primal part of your brain because you're connecting
Yeah.
so deeply with your breath. And I've never experienced free diving. I've done some work with breath holding, some long distance swimming too. And even just that, like being in the water for that amount of time, I think there's something about just the vastness and the darkness of the water and being there. And you can't listen to anything else. You can't talk to anybody else. Like it's just you're in there. And the only thing you really have
Yes.
connection to is the water and your breath. So yeah, I think that's super, super cool that you're into that. Something that we've spoken about quite a bit, getting into.
So,
But yeah, I find you always see parallels with like, people that value or take part in psychedelic experiences and take them seriously, not just saying party settings, but take it serious for what it is. Typically those people are connected to like, whether it's jujitsu, surfing, free diving, like there's some other form of activity or practice that they take part in that also connects them so deeply to their breath. So I'm sure you could maybe speak on that a little bit more when it comes to the connection of psychedelics and breath work. But in my head, it's like there almost has to be a very deep connection there.
yeah, definitely. And I did some work in the past on the effects of holotropic breathwork, and we see pretty similar trends with regards to the effect. Interestingly, what that paper showed was that it didn't depend so much on the magnitude of the psychedelic experiences because people still got better. And that made me think, okay, maybe there's some biological mechanism going on here rather than just the psychological aspect, right? So that that moment in my career might have also steered me towards more multidisciplinary research rather than just psychological, which is what it was in the very beginning. Like my PhD was very focused on psychology because that was what my background was in.
Yeah, do you think there's some parallel between, say, you have a peak mental experience, a peak physical experience? In a way, both are creating serious ego dissolution and some kind of connection to the divine. Like, I even know for me, when I've done like really long endurance events, there's always a point where I feel like I'm totally gone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I just wonder if there's something to be said about in both of those states, you're getting out of your own way. And it's almost like the system has this period to just reset.
Yeah. Yeah. Or also just to be without any other distraction. Like you mentioned, like you guys mentioned, stillness in the water and all of that. So what is there when there's nothing else to distract you? And can you tune into that? And these peak experiences really show us what we are in these moments. And last year I had the chance to get to know a beautiful person. His name is Douglas Robinson. And he wrote the book called The Alchemy of Action, which is about climbing and how, let's say, extreme sports could evoke a certain cocktail of neurotransmitters, cytokines, whatever, right? And this is basically what's creating these peak experiences or psychedelic-esque experiences, if you want, in terms of extreme sports.
What is the next stage for you with research? Like, what are you looking at doing next? And kind of with everything you've already done, where is your interest peaking now?
Right now, it's about finalizing the papers of the results from the 5-MeO project. Other than that, I have the paper on pivotal physical states, which we're finishing up in the next 2 weeks. Then another thing on my radar is the phenomenon of catharsis, which I think is very important.
Can you define catharsis?
Why? Catharsis would be, let's say, a pivotal point, a pivotal state whereby people are processing pent up affect, feeling through it. So, for example, in an ayahuasca session, people will be purging, right? Many people are reporting they're vomiting or they're shitting their pants, and it's all to clean their mind, body, and spirit. So in a similar way, that's what I think about when I also say catharsis. And I'm curious if there are any neurocorrelates to that and whether pivotal physical states is part of that equation. Because much of the literature that I read the last year seems to point to the fact that we're not really living through a mental health pandemic. We're living through an emotional constipation crisis. So people need to process whatever hurt them and feel it and release it.
Now, a question I have for you there. Why do you think we're living through a crisis now when it comes to pent up emotion and say even 30, 40, 50 years ago, we didn't see the same amount of mental health? Do you think that was just because we weren't diagnosing as much, or you think people were actually dealing with emotions better even years ago? Like, what do you think is going on there?
I don't think it's just one factor. I think it's a mix of things. Maybe people think they're processing things, but it could also be that they're spiritual bypassing. This whole thing with overdiagnosing is definitely valid. So I think it's a mix, and let's say the food that we're eating, like processed food, also kind of blunts emotional processing opportunities. Medication doesn't help also, so I could go on, but the list is super long. The lifestyle, you know.
The one that we're super passionate about is the food thing. One of our best friends owns a regenerative farm up in our area. And, when you see the connection between the sun, the grass, the cows, the plants, and then you think about taking in that information and how easily your body decodes that and recognizes it versus processed garbage food. And then from like a nervous system standpoint, I always think about, look at the capacity difference in the system to be able to handle a novel stressor, to be able to deal with emotion when you're closing that window due to shitty food that your body doesn't understand and can't process versus just biological, natural information that it understands. It's like you can regulate and deal with emotion at such a higher level just through changing your food.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And also it very much impacts performance. Like I left Egypt about almost 2 months ago. And the reason for that was food related. The water is not good in Egypt, at least in Dahab where I was living, which is a small little desert town. And food isn't amazing either. So chances of getting amoeba, like intestinal parasites, are pretty damn huge.
Yeah.
And I had a severe case of it, which made me have to like make a decision, like I need to leave. So I relocated to Italy, which is amazing in terms of food and everything. So it's been 2 months of healing my gut now, and I feel amazing, better than ever.
Beautiful. And on that note, tell us a little bit more about Italy. So we talk all the time about like that's somewhere we'd potentially love to live one day. That's where our grandparents were born. And we haven't been yet. We want to get back there soon, but as a family. But just tell us a little bit about your short stint here in Italy and just what you're noticing, like cultural differences, food differences, what makes you feel alive about the country. I'd love to hear that a bit.
I was reflecting on it the other day, actually, because I was like, okay, in the beginning when I came here, like I came from Egypt, living in Dahab. It's a very high stress environment, not only because you have to dodge amoebas everywhere, but it's like the Arabic culture is pretty difficult for a woman.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I think I would say it's a very extreme environment. There's heat, the desert, there's no fucking nature whatsoever, other than sand, right? Mm-hmm. There's no greenness. So it's a very harsh environment. And having lived in that environment for on and off like 4 years, I could now see when I transitioned to Italy what my body set was like. So what Italy asked of me was to slow down, find a new baseline, like enjoy the present, and also you can feel safe enough to enjoy it, right? And in the beginning, I must admit, it was a little bit hard to make that switch. And there was, let's say, a bit of hesitance or like, let's say, resistance for me to do that. But the moments I did, I was reminded of like how much beauty there is in the present moment. Watching the sunset with a friend drinking Aperol Spritz.
Beautiful.
Very classic. Or like making pasta and becoming a pasta snob in terms of like all the different brands and flavors and just the simplicity and of everything is like minimum effort, maximum satisfaction. Like it's good.
That should be like their tagline when you enter the country. Like the first thing you see in the airport, minimal effort, maximum satisfaction. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have one more question just about not necessarily about your research in particular, but I know I'll speak for myself, and I'm sure anybody that's taken part in a psychedelic experience can say the same thing. I've said it after a few experiences I've had when people ask me like, what was it like? Or they kind of ask you, what did you experience? I always find it tough to put it into words, and I almost find words dilute what I actually felt. Like I can never correctly or accurately put it into words to somebody. And you know, we've used the term throughout the podcast, mystical experience. And I'm sure there's some things within psychedelic experiences that science will never be able to explain. In saying that, well, one, I guess, would you agree with that? Two, with there being such a mystical aspect towards these experiences and you conducting research in the field, what is your goal with your research? Like, what are you hoping to find out or bring to the attention of anybody that's looking for more information on these experiences? Like what is kind of your overarching goal with all your research?
I think for me it's very interesting to try to understand and to share knowledge about what makes people heal, thrive, and optimize. because that's what I see is the problem areas for many people in the world. And so the mechanisms and effect is therefore very interesting. So the way that things get better, the way things are optimized, the way things are, yeah, the way that people are thriving, you know, what supports those pillars. And again, like the pivotal physical state model is something I'm really keen on mapping out. Also validate the body set theory, because like the paper is one step. It's laying the theoretical foundation, but then it's about conducting the research, right? And we have some data already coming in from the 5MEO project. So once we've finished those papers, that will be out in the open. Catharsis again is important for me, and I think it's a little bit of a forgotten technology in this world, circling back to the whole emotional constipation thing. So the way I see catharsis is like, if you think of consciousness like an operating system, like catharsis is the reboot of that system.
Beautiful. And do you think, like, is there a part of psychedelics and the whole experience that you think is beyond science and potentially putting people into an energetic field of some sort that's always been there, that is timeless, that is boundless, that we might not fully understand, but just through touching that, maybe there's clinical results even just from that aspect of it?
Well, I think that science, well, our tools to study things will evolve. So maybe we are limited now in terms of what we can assess. That doesn't mean that won't change in the future.
Sure.
Like in the past, people thought electricity was magic, right? So now it's very different. So what I'm trying to say is that reality won't change, but maybe our understanding of what reality is will, depending on the tools later on.
Yeah, very cool. I'm starting to meet and talk to a lot of people with that opinion, and it's kind of reshaping the way I look at things as well, because potentially just because we don't understand it yet doesn't mean we won't someday will.
Which is the purpose of science. And we need people like that, right? Like that are trying their best to push the boundaries and, not just taking something for what it seems to be on the surface or even how they feel about it internally. I think it's super important. And I know this guy's been trying to do his best to learn about that whole field for a long time, and he appreciates people like yourself and people that, do kind of step over the boundary and see what they can accomplish and see what they can learn about it.
I've got one more question though.
Yeah, go for it.
Just because you brought it up and I'd love to hear your thinking on it. This is going to be very obviously it's not a one size fits all answer, but when you look at the words heal, thrive, and optimize, what do you believe people need as pillars in their life in order to do that?
I think that it very much comes down to what I said earlier on with the factors that moderate an experience. So setting, body set, and mindset. And the setting part is obviously where you are, who you are surrounded with makes a huge difference. Your outlook on life, attitude, all of these things, body sets. So all these habits of in your lifestyle, like diet, exercise, all of these things are all moderators of how you experience something, whether it's just life as a whole or even a hot pot or hot chapter in your life does not necessarily need to be so hard if these things are catered for, right? So there is room to manage it with, let's say, more success in a way. So it's about facing the difficulty and healing through it rather than becoming very dysfunctional and dysregulated from that incident. Because at the end of the day, life is stressful. It's about how we meet it. and the container we have in ourselves to do so and around
Yeah,
us.
I love that. And I love the work that you're doing and the message you're putting out there, because, you know, as someone who values psychedelics, I also just as much, if not more, I would say more, value the day-to-day habits and patterns that keep my body and mind in a good place. And I think that message is important as this becomes like, let's call it the next wave of it, or just there needs to be educators telling people the message you do. Like, yes, these can be powerful, they can be helpful, but the mindset, the body set, everything in your life is going to add to the experience or take away from it.
Yeah. And like, it could be any technology, right?
Yeah.
Like technology, be it psychedelics, running, or freediving, is the same. It's a stressor for the system.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I see it, any stressor is like a mini challenge or like a longer challenge. So I've had my shared experiences of psychedelic use. I've done a lot of freediving, and in December, I completed the Goggins challenge with my best friend.
Sweet.
Through. And the way that we did it, like 0 injuries, like nothing, right? And we were puzzled by this. I'm like, bro, this was perfectly executed. That's why.
You might want to teach
Like,
this guy a
patting
thing or
myself
two.
on the back.
Yeah, I did it a couple of years ago. My friend ended up needing hip surgery after.
Oh, fuck.
Our friend who's a physiotherapist, and we're like, dude, because he wasn't running at all. We're like, bro, you might like fuck yourself here. Like, this is a heavy thing to step in. Oh, he's like, no, I'm good. Yeah, I needed hip resurfacing surgery, and then this guy was down for the count too. So
God.
I don't know. You might need to give them a tip or two.
Yeah, keep telling us how you did it with such grace.
Well, no, I think without knowing it, I was using this whole framework of around setting, body set, mindset, all of these things. Plus, I think that with me and Fru, it was also the fact that we're freedivers, and so we're very trained to manage stress and endure that. And we're both runners. Like, we didn't really just randomly start running. But of course, we just did maybe 7-10 kilometers whenever we ran a couple of times a week. So the Goggins was like 7 kilometers every 4 hours, 48 hours. Like, yay. But we had our little routine, you know, running, stretching, using the foam roller, eating, and all of that stuff. It was a fun little dance until the end of the challenge when we were really sleep deprived.
For sure. That's awesome though.
Yeah, well, I think like Luke said, we appreciate you taking the time here. And I think that, you know, the whole realm of spirituality and psychedelics can use more people like you that are into it, but also at the same time, you know, have their head on their shoulders, aren't afraid to get after it, do hard things, and experience life to the fullest. So,
and keep sending us the research articles as they come out, because I'm always interested to sit down and nerd out on them.
Yes. Yeah. Next up is the pivotal physical state.
So cool. Yeah, we'll be right into that.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll get you back on soon, and we'll be staying in touch and watching. So,
See, thank you so much.
Awesome.
It's been a pleasure talking with you boys.
Awesome. Thank
have
you.
a good one. The Primitive Patterns Podcast. It's time to live your mystery.